The night was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes in the late hours, when the world seems to pause. A few cars trickled through the empty streets, their headlights cutting through the dark as they passed the lonely gas station on the corner of Route 56. A lone figure stood under a flickering street lamp, pumping gas into his truck. The sound of the nozzle clicking as it finished filling was the only noise breaking the stillness. At the far end of the parking lot, a motorcycle engine revved, the sound vibrating through the air, growing louder as it approached. The rumble of the engines could be heard from a distance, a sign of trouble, or maybe it was just the sound of reckless freedom that bikers carried with them wherever they went. The two soldiers, a black man and his partner, had no way of knowing that their calm night was about to take a sharp turn. They were just two ordinary men, back from an exhausting mission overseas, making a pit stop on their way home. They didn't look like soldiers, to anyone passing by. They were just another pair of men in their mid-30s filling up their truck at an empty gas station. They were dressed in civilian clothes, the kind that blended in easily with the crowd. But the lives they had lived, the things they had seen, set them apart from most. They had survived battles, some literal, others psychological, that had shaped them into something stronger than most people could ever imagine. The soldier on the left, Marcus, stood tall, his body still conditioned from years of service. His eyes scanned the quiet surroundings as he filled the gas tank, his posture relaxed but alert. His partner, Elijah, was checking his phone on the other side of the truck, but his attention wasn't entirely on the screen. He had learned to pay attention to his surroundings too. Something about this gas station, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, felt off. Marcus felt it too. A gut feeling, one that was honed over years of experience. He glanced over his shoulder, spotting the motorcycles pulling into the lot. The rumble grew louder, more pronounced, as if announcing their arrival. As the bikes came to a stop, the sound of engines dying down left an eerie quiet in its wake. The group of bikers dismounted, each one dressed in leather jackets and heavy boots. They were loud, brash, and exuded an air of arrogance. The leader of the group was a tall man with a shaved head and tattoos snaking down his arms. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling confidence as he surveyed the area. He was used to being in control, and tonight, he had decided that the gas station would be his domain. Without hesitation, he walked toward the two soldiers, his steps purposeful. His gang followed behind, forming a semicircle around the soldiers' truck as if they were closing in on their prey. The air was thick with tension, and Marcus could feel it rise like a storm in the distance. He didn't like it. But he didn't back down either. He simply finished pumping the gas, his eyes on the leader of the group. "Got a problem with us?" Marcus asked, his voice low but firm. The biker grinned, stepping closer, looking down at Marcus like he was just another target. "Don't like your kind hanging around here, soldier. You know, black guys like you shouldn't be in places like this. This is our turf." The words hung in the air like poison, the biker's voice dripping with contempt. Elijah, sensing the rising danger, stood up from his spot by the truck. His hand instinctively moved toward his side, where he kept a small tactical knife. He didn't want trouble, but he was ready if it came. Marcus, on the other hand, kept his cool, his gaze never wavering from the biker's eyes. "I don't think you know who you're talking to," Marcus said, his tone steady. "We're not here to start trouble. We're just passing through. But if you want to make it one, I'm happy to have a conversation." The biker's grin widened, but his eyes narrowed. "You think you're tough, huh? You think you can talk to me like that?" Before Marcus could reply, the biker lunged forward, shoving him hard in the chest. The force of the push sent Marcus stumbling back, knocking into the side of the truck. The nozzle from the gas pump slipped from his hand and sprayed fuel in every direction, creating an acrid mist that made the air even more stifling. In that instant, something inside Marcus clicked. He had spent years in high-stress environments, surviving the chaos of war, and this was nothing. But it wasn't just the push that had him tense. It was the dangerous look in the biker's eyes, the clear intent to escalate this situation into something far more violent. "Get the hell off him!" Elijah shouted, stepping forward and placing himself between Marcus and the bikers. His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. The leader of the bikers smirked, clearly expecting the soldiers to back down. But Marcus wasn't backing down, and Elijah wasn't either. They weren't afraid of a fight. They'd seen too much to be scared by a couple of ignorant bikers. "Back off," Marcus warned again, his voice even but firm. "I don't want any trouble, but I won't walk away from a fight if it comes to that." The bikers circled them now, their laughter echoing through the lot. They thought it was funny, thought they had control of the situation. But Marcus had dealt with enemies far worse than this. They didn't know it yet, but they had just picked a fight with the wrong men. The air was thick with hostility. The quiet hum of the gas station, the distant sound of cars passing by, all seemed to fade into the background. It was just them now, the soldiers standing strong and the bikers closing in, eager to assert their dominance. And then, in the blink of an eye, the situation exploded. The biker who had shoved Marcus reached out again, this time aiming a fist toward his face. Marcus blocked the punch effortlessly, twisting the biker's wrist until he dropped to his knees. In one smooth motion, Marcus moved, landing a quick jab to the man's gut, sending him reeling backward. The rest of the bikers lunged forward in a rush, but Marcus and Elijah were ready. They had been trained for this. They had been trained for much worse. Elijah spun, grabbing the wrist of the closest biker and twisting, using his weight to throw the man to the ground with a force that made the gravel beneath them scrape. Another biker charged at Marcus, but Marcus was already moving. With a quick swipe, he knocked the man's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the pavement. But just as quickly as the fight had started, it escalated. One of the bikers reached for a crowbar from the side of his bike, brandishing it like a weapon. He swung it wildly toward Elijah's head, but Marcus intercepted, grabbing the crowbar and yanking it from the man's hands with surprising strength. He used the crowbar to push the biker back, just enough to create space. The rest of the bikers hesitated for a moment, their faces twisted in disbelief. They had expected this to be easy. They hadn't counted on the soldiers' skill, nor their tenacity. Marcus and Elijah stood their ground, their breath heavy, their eyes locked onto the bikers. The bikers, realizing they were in over their heads, began to retreat, muttering curses under their breath. But the damage was done. They had underestimated their opponents, and now they were walking away, defeated and humiliated. As the bikers retreated, Marcus and Elijah stood there, catching their breath. The situation had calmed, but the tension was still palpable, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. "What the hell just happened?" Elijah muttered, wiping his hand across his face as he steadied himself. Marcus let out a long breath. They didn't know who they were messing with. Not this time. But as they turned to leave, Marcus felt something stir in the pit of his stomach. The bikers might be gone, but they weren't the only threat in the world. And in the quiet darkness, something still lingered, a feeling that this night wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. The bikers were gone, their roaring engines fading into the distance as they sped away from the gas station. The two soldiers, Marcus and Elijah, remained standing, their breathing heavy, adrenaline still pumping through their veins. The quiet hum of the gas station was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just experienced. They stood there for a moment, gathering themselves. Marcus wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his eyes scanning the empty parking lot. It felt like something was off, like the events of the night hadn't quite played out the way they seemed. The bikers had backed down too quickly. That wasn't normal. People like them didn't just retreat without a reason. "You okay?" Elijah asked, breaking the silence. Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Yeah, I'm good. But something doesn't feel right." They were too eager to pick a fight, and then, just like that, they're gone. It doesn't add up. Elijah frowned, looking over at the empty road where the bikers had disappeared. You think they'll come back? I don't know. But I wouldn't put it past them. Marcus paused, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the highway. We should be careful. This might not be over. Elijah didn't say anything in response. He could tell that Marcus was thinking deeper, analyzing the situation the way a soldier would. It wasn't just about the confrontation at the gas station anymore. It was about what came next. And he wasn't sure either what that would be. The two soldiers didn't stick around to discuss it any longer. They had a job to do, and after everything that had just happened, they needed to keep moving. Marcus finished filling the truck, and the two men got in, starting the engine and pulling out of the gas station. The drive was quiet, the hum of the tires on the asphalt the only sound between them. As they rolled down the highway, the dim lights of the gas station slowly faded into the rearview mirror, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the road ahead. But for Marcus and Elijah, the road ahead felt like more than just a journey. It felt like a path to something unknown. The fight had been more than just a physical encounter, it had tapped into something deeper, something they couldn't shake off. They had lived through enough to know when something was brewing, when danger wasn't finished with them yet. As the minutes passed, they approached a small town. The lights in the distance were warm, inviting, but something about the quietness of the place made Marcus uneasy. It felt too peaceful, too calm. It was as if the town had its own secrets. The truck rolled through the empty streets, the buildings looking like silent witnesses to the world around them. Marcus turned his head, looking out the window, his mind still processing the events at the gas station. That was too easy, he muttered to himself. What's that? Elijah asked, noticing the tension in Marcus's voice. The bikers, Marcus replied. I've seen fights like that before. They didn't just back off like that. Someone else is involved. Elijah raised an eyebrow. You mean there's more to it? You think they were just the tip of the iceberg? I do, Marcus said, his voice low. This doesn't feel like it was a random encounter. It feels like we were set up. Like someone's pulling strings behind the scenes. Elijah sat back in his seat, staring out the windshield, taking in the quiet town that lay ahead. He knew Marcus was right. They weren't just soldiers, they were survivors. And survivors didn't ignore their instincts. Something was happening, and it wasn't just about two bikers at a gas station. Just as Marcus was about to speak again, the truck's radio crackled to life. The static faded, replaced by a voice. Attention all units, be advised, suspects identified as members of the Southern Riders are reported in the area. Use caution. The voice was muffled but clear enough for them to hear. The Southern Riders? The name sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He had heard of them, vicious, ruthless, a biker gang with connections that stretched far beyond what anyone could imagine. They were known for running illegal operations, for extortion, for controlling parts of the city through fear and intimidation. Elijah, Marcus said, his tone tense. Those bikers weren't just a random group. The Southern Riders have a presence here. Elijah's eyes narrowed. You think they were working for them? It's possible, Marcus said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. They're a part of something bigger. And we just got caught in the middle. The truck rolled through the town, past quiet houses and darkened storefronts. Everything seemed too still, too quiet. But Marcus knew that calm could be deceptive. Behind every peaceful facade could be something dangerous waiting to strike. They reached the edge of town, and the truck slowed as it approached an old diner. The neon sign flickered, casting a sickly glow on the cracked pavement. Marcus pulled into the parking lot and parked near the entrance. He glanced at Elijah, who gave him a quick nod. They had to figure out what was going on, and they needed information. The diner was as good a place as any. The two soldiers stepped out of the truck, the cool night air hitting their faces. As they approached the diner's entrance, the door swung open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with a thick beard and a grim expression. His eyes locked onto Marcus and Elijah as they approached. "You two looking for something?" the man asked, his voice gruff. "We're just passing through," Marcus said, his tone casual but cautious. "Heard some things about the Southern Riders. You know anything about that?" The man stiffened at the mention of the gang. "Not the kind of people you want to mess with. But I'm guessing you already know that." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He let the silence hang between them, watching the man closely. "Tell you what," the man continued, glancing over his shoulder as if checking for anyone nearby. "If you want to know more, you can come inside. But you better be prepared for what you're getting into. This town, it's got more secrets than you'd think." Marcus exchanged a look with Elijah. This was the lead they needed. They stepped inside the diner. The inside of the diner was dimly lit, with old booths lined up against the walls. The smell of stale coffee and grease filled the air, but neither Marcus nor Elijah cared about that. They were here for answers. The man led them to a booth in the back, away from prying eyes. He slid into the seat opposite them, his eyes darting around nervously. "I'm Jake," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've lived here long enough to know when something's wrong. And something's definitely wrong." "Tell us what you know," Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. Jake hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "The Southern Riders, they've been running this town for years. It's not just about the bikers anymore. They've got their hands in everything: drugs, weapons, even the local law enforcement. They control this place with fear, and anyone who stands up to them, well, they disappear. No one talks about them, but people know." Elijah leaned in closer. "And what about us? Why are they after us?" Jake's eyes flickered, his expression darkening. "You just made a mistake. They don't take kindly to strangers poking around. You crossed their line, and now they want you gone." "The bikers at the gas station? They were just the beginning." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. It was worse than he thought. The Southern Riders weren't just a threat, they were a full-blown operation, one that had infiltrated the town completely. And they had just marked Marcus and Elijah as their next targets. The air felt thick as Marcus and Elijah sat in the dimly lit diner, the weight of Jake's words hanging heavily between them. The Southern Riders weren't just a local gang. They were a network, a force that controlled the entire town, and anyone who crossed them became a target. Marcus had been in tough situations before, but nothing like this. He could feel the danger creeping closer, and he knew that they were already too deep in this web to back out now. Jake leaned forward, his eyes darting around nervously as if to make sure no one was listening. "Listen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the first people to wander into this town thinking they could take on the Southern Riders. A lot of people have tried. Most don't make it out. The ones who do, well, they don't come back the same." Marcus kept his gaze fixed on Jake. There was something more to his story, something he wasn't telling them. Elijah must have sensed it too because he leaned in, his voice calm but firm. "Why are you telling us this, Jake? What do you want from us?" Jake's eyes flickered to the door again, and for a moment, he looked like he might back out of the conversation. But then, with a deep breath, he sighed, resigned. "I don't want anything from you. But I can't sit here and watch them tear this town apart. The Riders, they've got their hands in everything. And no one does anything because they're scared. I don't want to be scared anymore." Marcus could tell there was more, but Jake was holding back. He wasn't stupid, he knew the man was weighing his options, trying to decide whether or not to trust them. The problem was, trusting. Anyone here felt like a gamble. They didn't know who was with the Riders, who was against them, or who was simply trying to survive. "You said we crossed a line," Elijah said, his voice low but steady. "What exactly does that mean? What did we do to get their attention?" Jake hesitated, looking around once more. Then, as if making a decision, he leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "There's a reason they targeted you. It's not just about what happened at the gas station. It's about the truck you're driving. It's about who you are. You're not just any soldiers passing through." Marcus furrowed his brow, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's just a truck." Jake's face was grim. "It's not just any truck. It's a convoy truck. A military-grade vehicle, the kind they've been looking for. They need that truck for something big. Something they've been planning for months. If they find out who you really are, you're going to be in way more trouble than you think." Elijah leaned back, processing the information. "A convoy truck? What the hell do they want with a military truck?" Jake shook his head. "I don't know. But I do know that it's not just the bikers who are interested in it. There are other people, powerful people, who are watching you. And you're walking right into something much bigger than a gang war." Marcus glanced at Elijah, who was now scanning the diner's interior, his mind likely racing through the possibilities. The Southern Riders weren't just a random gang, they were connected to something far more dangerous, something that could change everything. The stakes had just been raised, and the realization hit Marcus hard. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for control of something bigger. "So what do we do now?" Elijah asked, his voice calm but tense. "We can't just walk away from this." Jake looked around the diner once more before answering. "You can't walk away. No one can. But I can help you. I know a way out of this. There's a safe house about 20 miles from here. If you get there before they realize what you've got, you might have a chance to figure out what's going on. But you've got to move fast. The riders are everywhere, and they don't play games." Marcus stood up, the weight of the decision already settling in. The road ahead was uncertain, but there was no turning back. They had been dragged into this mess, and now they had no choice but to see it through. "We'll take our chances," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Lead the way." Jake stood up as well, pulling a jacket from the back of his chair. "It's not going to be easy. You'll need to stay off the main roads. The riders have eyes everywhere." The three of them stepped out of the diner and into the night, the cold air biting at their skin. Marcus and Elijah climbed back into their truck, while Jake hopped into his own vehicle. The headlights pierced the darkness as they began to drive out of town, the road ahead winding through hills and forests. The further they drove, the more it felt like they were entering unknown territory. The quiet was deafening, the tension in the air palpable. Every passing car made Marcus uneasy, every shadow seemed to hold the potential for danger. They were being watched. And the Southern Riders weren't the only ones interested in them. As they drove, the terrain began to change. The roads became rougher, narrower, winding through dense woods. It was clear they were moving away from civilization, deeper into the wilderness. They had no choice but to trust Jake, but a nagging doubt lingered in the back of Marcus's mind. Was he really on their side? Or was he leading them straight into a trap? Jake's headlights flickered ahead, signaling that they were coming to a stop. He pulled off the road and into a clearing. The truck came to a halt, and Marcus and Elijah exchanged wary glances. It was quiet here, too quiet. Jake stepped out of his vehicle and approached them. "We're almost there. But we need to hurry. They've probably already figured out where we're going." Marcus climbed out of the truck, his eyes scanning the dark woods. There was something unsettling about the way Jake was acting. He seemed nervous. Was it fear? Or something else? Marcus couldn't tell, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. "We stay together," Marcus said, his voice low. No matter what happens, we don't split up. Jake nodded quickly, his face pale. I know the way. Follow me. They walked into the woods, the crunch of leaves beneath their boots the only sound that broke the stillness. The trees towered over them, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out endlessly. Marcus felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The deeper they went into the forest, the more it felt like they were being drawn into something they couldn't escape. Minutes passed, and then hours. The trees grew thicker, and the path more treacherous. Jake was leading them at a fast pace, clearly in a hurry. But what was he running from? And why did he seem so desperate? Finally, they reached a small cabin, hidden in a secluded part of the woods. It was old, dilapidated, and barely visible from the outside. But it was a refuge, and it was all they had. Jake opened the door, revealing a dark interior. This is it, he said, his voice barely audible. Stay here until we figure out what's going on. You'll be safe here for now. But as Marcus stepped into the cabin, a sudden realization hit him. This wasn't just about the truck. This wasn't just about survival. They had been dragged into something far darker than they had ever imagined. And they were running out of time. The door slammed shut behind them, locking them inside. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the small, dimly lit cabin. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Jake had been acting too nervous, too desperate. The urgency in his voice, the way he'd been glancing around, they were all signs that they weren't safe, not even here. Elijah seemed to sense it too. As soon as they crossed the threshold, he scanned the room, looking for exits or any sign of danger. The cabin was small, sparsely furnished with old wooden furniture and a dusty floor that creaked with every step. A single oil lamp flickered on the table, casting long shadows on the walls. The room felt suffocating, as if the air itself was thick with secrets. Stay sharp, Marcus whispered, his eyes locked on the door, waiting for any movement outside. But the night was silent, save for the wind rustling the trees outside. He wasn't sure if he was paranoid or if there was something out there, something waiting. They had to be careful. They were in uncharted territory now, and every move counted. Jake stood by the door, his hand on the knob as if he was preparing to bolt at any moment. His face was pale, his eyes darting from Marcus to Elijah, and back to the door. I know what you're thinking, Jake said, his voice strained. You don't trust me. You shouldn't. But there's something I need to tell you. Marcus crossed his arms, refusing to look away from Jake. What's going on, Jake? What's really going on here? Jake swallowed hard, then stepped away from the door, pacing back and forth in the cramped space. I didn't want to drag you into this. But I couldn't just leave you out there without knowing what's coming. You need to understand, this is bigger than the riders. The riders are just a part of it. A tool, really. The people who are really pulling the strings are much more dangerous. And they'll stop at nothing to get what they want. Elijah narrowed his eyes, his voice cold. What people? Who are we dealing with? Jake stopped pacing and faced them. He looked as though he was about to break, as if telling the truth was too much for him to bear. I don't know all the details. But I know enough. I know they've been looking for that truck. They've been tracking it for weeks. And they're not just interested in the truck, it's what's inside. It's the cargo. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What cargo? What are you talking about? Jake hesitated before answering. His voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking the words out loud made them too real. Weapons. But not just any weapons. High-tech military-grade stuff, stuff that could change everything. The kind of stuff the government doesn't even want to admit exists. It's worth more than anything you can imagine. And the riders are just the muscle. The real players are much worse. Elijah stepped forward, his jaw tight. You mean we're not just dealing with a gang of bikers? We're dealing with something bigger? Jake nodded grimly. Yes. This isn't just about territory. This is about control, power. There are people, powerful people, who want what's in that truck. And if they get it, the balance of power could shift. Forever. Marcus looked at Elijah, the weight of Jake's words sinking in. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was about something far bigger, something that could affect not just them, but the entire country, maybe even the world. He felt a growing sense of urgency. They had to find out what was really going on, and fast. How do we stop them? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. Jake shook his head, his face filled with a mix of fear and frustration. You don't stop them. At least, not without knowing who you're up against. You need to find out what's inside that truck. You need to figure out what the hell the riders are really after before it's too late. A loud bang echoed through the cabin, followed by the sound of heavy boots crunching on the gravel outside. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The riders had found them. Jake bolted for the window, peering out into the darkness. They're here, he muttered, his voice barely audible. We don't have much time. Without another word, Jake ran to the back door and flung it open, motioning for Marcus and Elijah to follow. The cold night air hit them like a slap in the face as they spilled into the woods, their boots crunching on the fallen leaves and twigs. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they darted between trees, trying to put distance between themselves and the cabin. The sound of the riders' vehicles revving up in the distance was unmistakable, growing louder with every passing second. Keep moving, Jake hissed. We can't let them catch us. Not yet. The three of them sprinted through the dense forest, the underbrush tearing at their clothes and skin. The sound of engines grew louder, closer. They had to get out of the open, but there was nowhere to hide. Not in these woods. Marcus's mind raced. What was in that truck? What could be so important that it had them running for their lives? He had never felt more out of control. But he couldn't let that stop him. Not now. After what felt like hours, they finally reached a clearing. A small, old barn stood in the middle of the open space, surrounded by tall grass. Jake motioned for them to follow him toward the barn. This way, Jake whispered, his voice strained. The riders won't expect us to hide here. We can lay low for a while. They hurried to the barn, slipping inside just as the sound of motorcycles roared through the woods, their headlights sweeping through the trees. Inside, the barn was dimly lit, the smell of hay and old wood thick in the air. There were boxes stacked against the walls and a few old tools scattered around. It was a far cry from the safety they'd hoped for, but it was all they had. Jake closed the door behind them, and the three of them huddled together in the darkness. The sounds of the riders. Vehicles grew fainter, but Marcus knew they weren't out of danger yet. They'll keep looking, Jake said, his voice trembling. They won't stop until they find us. But we can't let them know what we know. We have to figure out what's in that truck. If we don't, we're dead. Marcus nodded, his eyes burning with determination. He had no idea what was inside that truck, but he knew one thing for sure, it wasn't just a cargo load. It was a key to something much bigger. And they had to stop the riders from getting their hands on it. The barn was dark, save for the faint glimmer of moonlight that filtered in through cracks in the wooden walls. The sounds of the riders' motorcycles had faded, but that didn't mean they were safe. Marcus knew better. In a place like this, danger could strike at any moment, from any direction. They had barely escaped once, and if they weren't careful, they wouldn't be so lucky again. Jake was pacing, his mind clearly racing. His hands trembled as he wiped sweat from his forehead. The barn smelled of dust, hay, and something older, something that reminded Marcus of a time long gone. Still, the air was thick with tension, and every creak of wood or rustle of grass outside felt like a warning. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, his voice tight. "It's only a matter of time before they find this place. You've seen what they can do, they won't stop until we're all dead." Elijah shot him a look, his eyes narrowing. "And where do you expect us to go? You've already let us out of one trap. Do you have a second plan, or are we just running in circles?" Jake flinched, but his eyes didn't leave the barn door. He was clearly trying to come up with something, anything, to keep them safe. The longer they stayed here, the closer they came to being trapped with no way out. "I didn't want to bring you into this," Jake muttered, almost to himself. "But you're in it now. There's no turning back." Marcus stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Jake's shoulder. "What's going on? You keep talking about this big game, this thing with the truck and the cargo. What is it? What's in that truck that the riders and everyone else is after?" Jake's gaze flickered to the floor. He seemed to hesitate, as if the weight of his secret was too much to bear. Finally, with a deep breath, he spoke. "Do you know who the Southern Riders are really working for?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about some local gang. They've got connections. Powerful connections. I've seen things I can't even begin to explain. But I'll try." Marcus exchanged a look with Elijah, and the two of them moved closer. There was something in Jake's eyes, something that told Marcus this was bigger than just a simple rivalry between bikers. Much bigger. "Go on," Elijah said, his voice sharp. "We don't have time to waste." Jake swallowed hard, his fingers twitching at his sides. "The Southern Riders work for a group called the Dominion. They're not just a criminal organization. They're a political syndicate. They have influence in government, in business, hell, even in law enforcement. They've been around longer than anyone realizes, pulling strings from behind the scenes. And they want control over everything." Elijah shook his head, clearly skeptical. "A political syndicate? What are you talking about?" "We're talking about bikers here." Jake's eyes were wild with urgency now. "They've been using the riders to do their dirty work. Smuggling, trafficking, intimidation. They don't care about the law or who they hurt. All they care about is getting more power. The Dominion has their hands in everything, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Marcus could feel the weight of Jake's words settle in his chest like a stone. This wasn't just about fighting a gang. It was about fighting an organization that had roots everywhere, an organization that could ruin lives and never face the consequences. "And what does all of this have to do with the truck?" Marcus asked, his voice low but steady. Jake's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, he looked like he might retreat into silence. But then he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "The truck you're driving, it's not just carrying weapons. It's carrying a prototype. A weaponized technology, something that could change everything. The Dominion is using the riders to get it, and they'll kill anyone who gets in their way. Including you too." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet. A prototype? A weaponized technology? It was too much to process, but he knew one thing for certain: they had to protect the truck at all costs. If the Dominion was after it, then what was inside could be catastrophic in the wrong hands. "Where do we go now?" Elijah asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a kind of determination that Marcus could feel building inside him too. Jake was already moving toward the barn's far corner, where a set of old wooden crates were stacked. He began rummaging through them, pulling out a tattered map that looked like it had seen better days. He laid it out on the ground between them. "There's a compound," Jake said, pointing to a location on the map. "It's an old military base. The Dominion has a facility there, where they keep their experiments. They'll be looking for the truck there, and that's where we need to go. We can't let them get their hands on it." Marcus leaned over the map, studying the route. The location Jake pointed to was deep in the mountains, isolated from the rest of the world. It made sense. The Dominion wouldn't want to risk their experiments being discovered by anyone who might stumble across them. This facility, if it even existed, was their final chance to stop whatever was about to unfold. How do we get there? Elijah asked, his gaze moving between the map and Jake. Jake didn't answer right away. He seemed to be calculating something in his head, weighing the risks. Finally, he looked up, his eyes grim. We don't have a choice. We've got to move now. The riders won't wait. And the Dominion won't either. We'll have to move fast, stay off the grid. But if we can get to the compound before they do, we might be able to figure out how to stop them. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over him. They had no idea what they were walking into, but one thing was certain, they had to find that compound. They had to stop the Dominion, and whatever it was they were planning. Because if they didn't, the consequences would be unimaginable. As they prepared to leave the barn, the air outside felt colder than before. The sounds of the night had shifted, there were no longer the distant hum of motorcycles or the rustling of wind. It was as though the world had held its breath, waiting for them to make their next move. Jake led the way, taking them deeper into the woods, and they kept moving in silence. The trees loomed tall, casting long shadows across their path. Every step they took felt like a step closer to something dangerous, something that could change their lives forever. And just as Marcus thought the silence might stretch on forever, he heard it, the sound of a vehicle approaching. The unmistakable roar of an engine, followed by the flicker of headlights cutting through the trees. "Get down!" Jake hissed, pulling them all into the underbrush. They huddled in the dark, holding their breath as the sound of the vehicle grew closer. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as the headlights passed them, the shadow of the vehicle looming like a specter. But it wasn't just any vehicle. It was one of the riders' trucks, tall, menacing, and carrying something that looked like a military-grade weapon. The truck sped past, oblivious to their presence. They were getting closer. And time was running out. The moon hung high, casting long shadows across the landscape as Marcus, Elijah, and Jake trekked deeper into the dense forest. The eerie silence was only broken by the crunch of leaves beneath their boots. Every step seemed to weigh heavier than the last, and the air felt thick with the knowledge that time was running out. They were on their way to the compound, the final destination that could either make or break their fight against the Dominion. The past few hours had felt like an eternity, every movement had to be calculated, every turn taken with caution. The closer they got, the more the danger loomed, and the more Marcus could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him. "We're getting close," Jake murmured, glancing at the map in his hands. His voice had lost some of the earlier confidence, replaced with a hollow edge. He was visibly drained, both mentally and physically. The constant running, the uncertainty, the fear, it was wearing on him. But the intensity in his eyes hadn't faltered. If anything, it had sharpened. Elijah glanced up at the sky, the last remnants of daylight fading quickly. "Are we sure this place is even real? What if it's a trap? We're just walking into the unknown." Jake's response was cold, almost dismissive. "It's real. I've seen it with my own eyes. Trust me. The Dominion wouldn't leave it so exposed if they didn't want someone to find it. And if we don't get there first, they'll use that prototype to do God knows what." Marcus's mind raced. They still didn't know exactly what the prototype was or how it worked, only that it was some form of weaponized technology, something that could change the course of history. They had to destroy it, or the Dominion would gain unimaginable power. But the closer they got to their goal, the more Marcus realized the stakes weren't just about stopping a political syndicate. It was about stopping something far more dangerous, something far bigger than any of them had anticipated. They reached the edge of the forest, and the ground sloped downward, revealing a clearing. At the far end, nestled between towering concrete walls, was the compound. It was massive, its size impossible to truly comprehend until they saw it with their own eyes. Dark, imposing structures loomed in the distance, their outlines blurred by the fading light. The compound looked like a fortress, surrounded by high fences, security lights, and guards patrolling the perimeter. "This is it," Jake whispered. "We're here." The three of them crouched low, peering through the trees. Their goal was clear: get inside, find the prototype, and destroy it before it fell into the wrong hands. But there was no telling how many people were inside, or how difficult it would be to breach the compound. Everything they had learned so far pointed to a truth they couldn't ignore: the Dominion wasn't just a political syndicate, it was a well-organized, dangerous machine, and they were up against it. They had no time to waste. Jake took the lead, motioning for Marcus and Elijah to follow him. They moved swiftly, silently, using the cover of darkness to their advantage. Every step brought them closer to their goal, but also to the heart of danger. As they approached the compound's perimeter, they saw a gap in the security, a section of the fence where the wires had been cut. It looked deliberate, like someone had planned this exit, or perhaps a way in. Without speaking, they crawled through the opening, careful not to make any noise. The cold metal of the fence scraped against their skin as they squeezed through, and once they were inside, they felt a strange sense of vulnerability. Now, there was no turning back. The compound was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of generators and the occasional sound of footsteps. They moved through the shadows, staying close to the walls, relying on the little cover they had. They had no idea where the prototype was being kept, or how to find it, but they knew one thing: they couldn't afford to waste any more time. Jake led them to a large building at the center of the compound. The structure seemed to hum with activity, the soft glow of lights visible through the cracked windows. This was where the prototype had to be. Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline surging through his veins. He didn't know what they would find inside, but he knew it was the last chance they had to stop the Dominion. Without hesitation, Jake moved forward, silently prying open a window with a crowbar. The metal squealed as it gave way, and they slipped inside, one by one. They found themselves in a dimly lit hallway, the air thick with the smell of chemicals and old machinery. The walls were lined with faded posters of military operations and propaganda, but Marcus barely took note of them. His eyes were fixed on the hallway ahead. "We need to find the control room," Jake said, his voice low. "It's where they'll be monitoring everything. From there, we can figure out where the prototype is." They moved quickly, cautiously, weaving through corridors and avoiding the few guards that patrolled the building. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, but they managed to avoid detection. The tension in the air grew thicker with every passing second. Finally, they found the control room, an unmarked door at the end of a narrow hallway. Jake pushed it open, and the three of them slipped inside. The room was small, filled with screens and monitors, each displaying various data and camera feeds. But what caught Marcus's attention was the large screen at the center of the room. It displayed a map of the compound, and on it, there was a blinking red dot. "That's it," Jake muttered, pointing at the screen. "That's where they're keeping the prototype." Marcus's heart raced. The red dot was located in the deepest part of the facility, past several heavily guarded sections. It was going to be a challenge to reach it, but there was no turning back now. "Let's move," Marcus said, his voice firm. They headed toward the location marked on the map, but as they neared the final stretch, they were met with an unexpected obstacle. The door to the storage room was locked, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't break it open without alerting the entire compound. The last thing they needed was to be surrounded. "Plan B," Jake whispered, looking around the room for an alternative. His eyes settled on a ventilation shaft in the ceiling. "We'll take the vents." Without wasting another moment, they climbed up into the shaft, squeezing through the narrow opening. The metal walls were cold against their skin, and the air inside smelled stale. They moved as quickly as possible, crawling through the tight space with only the faint sound of their breathing to keep them company. Finally, they emerged on the other side, directly above the room where the prototype was kept. But as they dropped down into the room, they realized they were not alone. A figure stood in the center of the room, facing away from them. The person turned slowly, and Marcus's heart skipped a beat when he saw who it was. It was one of the riders. He didn't have time to process the shock. The rider lunged at them, a gun in hand, but before he could fire, Elijah was already moving. In a blur, he disarmed the rider and knocked him out cold. Marcus's breath came in quick bursts, his pulse hammering in his ears. They were so close, yet so far. They had to act quickly. The prototype was just ahead, locked in a high-tech container. But as Jake approached it, he hesitated. "It's not just a weapon," Jake murmured, his face pale. "It's more than that. This could change everything." Marcus didn't care. The time for questions was over. They had to destroy it. With a single move, Jake hit the detonation switch, and the room shook as alarms blared throughout the compound. They had done it. But now, they had mere minutes before the entire place went up in flames. As they sprinted toward the exit, they heard the roar of engines in the distance. The riders were closing in. But this time, they weren't running. They were ready to fight. And they would win.